Hi, and welcome to Bible 365. I am Kathy Carter, and I am reading through the Bible in 1 year, 365 days. Today, I am on day 97, which is on the calendar April 6th, and we are finishing up Judges 19 through 21. So, very quickly, if you have never been here before, this is your first time watching any of these videos, I am using the 1 Year Chronological Bible reading plan, which you can find online at the One Year Chronological Bible online.com. And it is a free, downloadable, printable reading plan that you can just print up, and every single day you can follow along with your Bible, reading along with me. You do not have to purchase another Bible. You can if you choose. They sell them online as well. But the printable version is online. And this goes through the Bible in chronological order. So we're going through it historically, which at this point, we haven't gone too much out of order, but we have just a little bit because Job was up there near the end of Genesis. And so we're going to start taking more out of the order that it's in the Bible to keep it chronological. So if you have read with me up to this point, you may or may not have missed too much, but we are definitely going to be diving into some jumping around at some point soon. So if you are reading with me today, we're at the end of Judges 19 through 21. I don't want to go too much into the background until I read this first. So we are at the end of Judges. This is what I want to read. So this is from Genesis, and I got to go down, obviously, and look at it. So this is from Genesis 19. Genesis 19. It's not the entire chapter, but I'm going to read a bit of a chunk of it. So angels arrive at Sodom. They're preparing to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Actually, they're not preparing to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. They are looking to see if they need to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And two angels have come down to check out the town. And then we're going to start just in verse 2. It says, "No," they answered, "we will spend the night in the square." So we're going to spend the night in the square. Verse 3 starts, "But he insisted so strongly," this is Lot, "that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, 'Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so we can have sex with them.' Verse 6, Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him. And he said, 'No, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man, 2 virgins. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof.' Verse 9 says, 'Get out of our way. This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them.' And then I'm going to go to verse 10. It says, 'But the men inside,', these were the 2 angels, "the men inside reached out and pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door.'" So that's how I want to end that. And you're going to see, I'm not going to get to it right away, but I'm going to eventually get to that. So just want you to remember that story. And that was Genesis 19. So starting at verse 1, that's Genesis 19. So we are in the book of Judges. In the book of Judges, this is a couple hundred, probably in the neighborhood of 2, maybe 300 years after Moses has died, and Joshua has brought them into the land of Canaan. So the 12 tribes of Israel have been brought into the land of Canaan. They have waged war against those people living in Canaan. God said he was going to give them everyone, but they did not take everyone. They left Canaanites in there. They left Jebusites in there. They left Perizzites in there. So there are other nationalities of people still in that land, but they overtook most of it. And then once they did, they took over the land, all the 12 territories, each got sort of a section of land. And now what's happening is there is no king, which I think is a really important phrase in this book. There is no king in the land of Israel, because they had asked people to be king, and they said no. And the last person they asked to be king was Gideon, and Gideon said, "No, the Lord is your king." And so at this point, there is no king. They're supposed to be following the Lord. But what's happening is they're all kind of doing stuff in their own eyes. So even these judges that are lifting up are sort of doing things that they believe is good in their own sight. And so the last one we saw, I think, it was in Dan. And so I don't even know if it was one of the judges, but there was the story of Micah and the Danites and how they took over. And so it's starting to get a little wild, right? So all these stories are starting to get they're a little bit more violent and bloody, and they're all starting to get a little bit wild. But what happens is a judge comes up by the Lord. A judge is raised up, and they take care of the people in the land, and they let the Israelites thrive for a while until the Israelites turn so far from the Lord that then they're crying out because they're being overtaken by other people. All right, so here's another story. And this is not about a judge. This is just a story of the people in the land. So we've sort of moved away from the judges. I think, I believe that Samson was the last judge that we spoke about. And so there's really not one that we speak of after this. But verse 1 starts out right away. In those days, Israel had no king. And this is a crazy story. And I'm not even sure how to sit with it because it's affecting me on a few different levels because a lot of stuff happens. It says, now a Levite who lived in a remote area of the hill country of Ephraim took a concubine from Bethlehem and Judah. And I want to note here that they specifically call this woman a concubine on more than one occasion, but they call him a husband. And so I know in the past I've spoken about this in Genesis, concubine or wife. Maybe it's a second wife, and so that's why she's called a concubine, but he is still a husband. So I'm not 100% sure of the situation, but what we do know is she seems to be living with him as a wife would live with him. Does it mean that she is what we would consider a mistress, or does it mean that she is a wife or a second, third, fourth, fifth? I don't know. Multiple wives? I'm not 100% sure, but what we know is she is a concubine, and she cheated on him. And so once she did that, she ran away. So it says she left him and went back to her parents' home in Bethlehem because she was unfaithful to him. And then she stayed there for 4 months, and then he went to go get her. And so once he goes to get her, he stays there for a few nights. So again, there's these extraneous details that I am sure have some depth to them and something. And mostly what I feel like is that no one really behaved in an honorable way. The wife was unfaithful. The Levite comes to get her. So he's a Levite. He comes to get her. Stays in this dad's home and stays there for a few days, sort of enjoying. And then the dad kind of doesn't want to let him go. And so he says, oh, stay for another night, stay for another night. And then finally the man says, it's time for us to leave. And he takes his wife and his wife and his servant, well, him and his concubine, excuse me, and then their servant. And they go and they start heading home. And then they come into this area, which is not in Israelite territory. And they say, we don't want to stay here because we're not supposed to be staying with them. We're kind of afraid of what they would do. And then they go into the land of Benjamin. And so they're in there in Gibeah. So they're in this small territory, in the territory of the Benjamites, which is the son Benjamin. And in this area, we're going to come to this section. So it says, they spent the night there. His master says, no. So this is, then it says in verse 16, an old man from the hill country of Ephraim who was living, because it says they stopped and spent the night, but no one would take them in. So they were in the square. And then in verse 16, that evening, an old man from the hill country of Ephraim who was living in Gibeah, he wasn't originally from Gibeah, he was living there, came in from his work in the fields, and he said, where are you going? Where'd you come from? So he saw them staying in the city square. And he said, we're on our way to Bethlehem. We have all this stuff to feed our people. We don't really need anything. And he says, you're welcome to stay at my house. Verse 20, let me supply whatever you need, only don't spend the night in the square. So here we go. And this is the reason I read this story in Genesis. There's sort of a warning at this time to not spend the night in the square. So again, I want to note that these are people of Israel. They have a standard that they are supposed to be maintaining. They are not maintaining this standard. There is no king in Israel, right? They are not maintaining this standard. Who is their king supposed to be? It is supposed to be the Lord. So even without a king, even without Moses, even without Joshua, they are supposed to be maintaining this standard to the Lord. And I want to reiterate this over and over again because this, I talked a little bit about it yesterday, I think, or maybe the day before. There is a desire in us to follow a leader. Our leader is the Lord, right? So whatever Mike is doing down the street, so-and-so's got 6 wives, none of those things matter. The reality is we are all supposed to be following the Lord, right? And we are supposed to be we are supposed to be desiring those others around us that say they follow the Lord to follow the Lord, right? So when there's an entire area in the land of the Benjamites that you can't even be in the city square, that's a problem because they're all supposed to be following the Lord as well as we are. Okay. So he says, we don't need anything. He says, you're welcome at my house. Don't stay in the square. So he took him in the house, fed his donkeys after he'd washed their feet. And another note, washing feet was very normal. When you went inside a place, servants would wash your feet. They had something to eat and drink. While they were enjoying themselves, verse 22, some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house. Pounding on the door, they shouted to the old man that owned the house, bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him. They are doing what is right in their own minds. The fact that this isn't even called out by anyone and they're sort of just hiding in the house, I want to say it's baffling to me. It's not, because all these crazy things are happening, around us, and a lot of times we turn a blind eye to some of the minor stuff because we feel like there's so much worse things going on. So again, much like in Sodom and Gomorrah, they're banging on the door, they're saying let the man out because all the men in the town want to have sex with a man. So the owner of the house goes outside. Now remember, in the other way, here we go again, Lot. Remember, Lot went outside. The owner says, no, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this outrageous thing. Here's my virgin daughter and his concubine. So once again, they are willing to give up the women in their family to these men. Now, I'm not sure why that would be. It seems to me it is just as vile to take women against their will than it is to take men. But maybe in that time, that was not the case. Maybe in that time, women, unfortunately, as much as they were supposed to be taken care of, they weren't taken care of as well as they should have been. And so they were willing to give the women up and not the men. I'm going to say taking anyone against their will feels completely wrong in the eyes of God. But they say take the women. And it says the men would not listen. So if you remember in the original story, then the angels go out and they sort of take care of business, right? So they went out and take care of business. That's not what the man does. So it says the men wouldn't listen. So the man took his concubine and he sent her outside to them. They raped her and abused her throughout the night. And at dawn, they let her go and she was dead. So they completely abused her to the point of death. The man allowed this to happen. They were doing what was right in their own eyes, right? He was not protecting the woman that he was supposed to be protecting, which was his, whether she was wife, concubine, whatever it was, she was still under his protection as a man in that area, and he did not protect her. So he allowed her to be taken and raped, and then she died. Once he finds out she's dead, he throws her on a donkey and he rides back home. He cuts her into 12 pieces and sends a piece of her to each of the tribes to let the tribes know what happened. So we're going to move into chapter 20. And in chapter 20 it says, then all of Israel from Dan to Beersheba from the land of Gilead came together as one and assembled before the Lord in Mizpah. The leaders of the tribes of Israel took their places in the assembly. So there was 400,000 people that were in there. And so then the man obviously was in there, the man who had delivered all of his parts to all of the 12 tribes. And he was in there and he explained to them what happened. So I want to note, I'm very frustrated about this chapter, sorry. I want to note in here that he does not take any responsibility for sending her out. Obviously all the rest of it is true, but remembering back in the garden, how important it is to not add anything and to not take anything away. And he very conveniently takes away his own part about not sending her outside. So he said they took her, they raped her, and they did do all those things. The townspeople were terrible. They were vicious, vile, awful, and they did awful things. And yet he did awful things as well. And it doesn't seem or look to me like he took any responsibility for it. I'm going to say it again and again and again. He did what was right in his own eyes, not what was right according to the Lord. He did what was right in his own eyes. So what happens after this is that they want to go in and they want to kill all the people in Gibeah, which is in the town of Benjamin. I don't know if you guys can hear the rain. The rain is just getting loud. It's like a heavy, crazy downpour today, and it's just getting louder and louder. So if you can hear it, maybe it's soothing. I don't know. It's like background music. Hopefully it doesn't overpower my voice. But so anyway, going back to this area. So they admit that what happened was awful, and they want to kill the people from Gibeah. And the Benjamites will not do that. They're actually going to protect those people. And so they come out, 26,000 people against, I think, 400,000 men. And so they come out. So, I mean, they're clearly overpowered. However, in verse 18, Israel goes up to Bethel, and he inquires of the Lord. So they do this, they go to war in this way with the power of the Lord. So they go and they ask the Lord, and the Lord says Judah is going to go up first. Well, Judah goes up first, and Benjamin kills a whole bunch of them. And so they come back, I think it's 26 or 25,000, something like that. So then they come back again, and then they go back to the Lord, and they say, shall we go again to fight against the Benjamites? And the Lord answers, go up against them. Then the Israelites did it a second time, and then the Benjamites beat them again, killed 18,000 Israelites. And then the Israelites, all of them went up to Bethel, and they started weeping to the Lord. They were crying out to the Lord and begging him to help them. They fasted, they presented offerings. And then it says, and then the Israelites inquired, because this is where the ark was, shall we go up again to fight against the Benjamites or fellow Israelites or not? Probably wondering at this point what is happening, why they aren't winning. And the Lord responded, go, tomorrow I'm going to give them into your hands. And then so Israel set out an ambush, and they kind of give a little bit of depth in the story. So they set out an ambush to kill. They set like smoke in this one area, so it split them up, and the people went to go see the smoke, and then they got ambushed and they got killed, and they wound up winning against the Benjamites. So pretty sure we're in this final chapter here. So they wound up winning against the Benjamites. And then if we go to verse 46, it says, on that day, 25,000 Benjamite swordsmen fell, all of them valiant fighters. So they are giving credit where credit is due. But 600 of them turned and fled into the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, where they stayed 4 months. The men of Israel went back to Benjamin and put all the towns to sword. They set everything on fire. They killed everybody in Gibeah, right? So they essentially got their revenge on the people that committed the evil deeds. And then if I go to verse 1 of 21, it says, the men of Israel had taken an oath at Mizpah. None of us will give his daughter in marriage to a Benjamite. So because of this war against them, they were like, okay, well, we're not going to have our women married. Well, then they realized that Benjamites will then no longer exist. And so they needed to find a way to have the men marry the women. And so they had this festival, and they allowed the Benjamites to come and steal the women out of the festival so they can say, hey, Benjamites will still live on, but we didn't give any of our wives to them willingly. It's a whole bunch of a crazy story. And that's the way Judges ends. So I want to read verse 25, because I feel like this is the most important thing. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. And while we can say some of these stories are crazy, but some aren't so crazy, what's the big deal? Why does it matter? For the story of Micah, for example, why does it matter if he had a Levite in his home and was making him be the priest? Why does it matter that there's an idol? Because the truth matters that they aren't following God. What happens to them is because they aren't following God. They were people that were plucked out of Egypt. These people for 400 years were slaves to Egyptians, right? They had kids, they had generational kids in there, and they were promised the land by God generations before that. But now they are living under slavery. And I don't want to make any assumptions that it was indentured servitude or they were just working. That's another name for working. They were slaves. They had no freedom. They weren't allowed to worship. They weren't allowed. The first thing that Moses asked was, let us go for 3 days and let us go worship our gods. No, they were not allowed to go and do that. So these people, hundreds of years before that, were plucked out of their slavery by the God that created the universe, right? The people that were oppressing them were destroyed, right? So the bad people, justice was served because they were holding them down and making them be slaves. And God said, those are my people, and I'm not going to let any of this happen. And so so the Lord destroyed those people, decimated them to the point where they wanted to please just get them out of here. We don't want them here anymore because they're destroying our crops and our animals are dying, right? And everything is terrible. And so these people were saved. And then they were put into a land that they did nothing to deserve. They did not build this land. They did not. They did not. I'm going to say make crops, but that's definitely not the words you use. They didn't produce anything, right? So they didn't do anything to produce fruit or trees, or they did none of this. They did not purify the water. They did none of those things. And yet God put them in that land. And God said, I have won already. I have won this land for you. And even after that, they didn't take out everybody God said to take out, right? So even after that, they let their own selves get in the way and they forgot to look towards the Lord, right? He says, look in front, don't look to the right, don't look to the left. Keep your eyes on me. And here we go. Now, Moses is gone. Joshua is gone. And slowly all they do is look at themselves. And they say, I'm going to do what's right in my own eyes. And we do not know what's right. And I know that is a hard thing to admit. That is a hard thing to reconcile because I feel like I can look around and of course I know what's good, what's evil. But I think we need to internally check and see, do we believe good and evil based on what other people say? Do we believe good and evil based on the way that we grew up? Do we believe good and evil based on the need that we have in that moment, right? Like, so I think we need to be very careful on what we recognize as good and evil and why we recognize it. It really takes some internal reckoning to understand that, and then to come to the truth that the being that created the world is the one who creates what's right and wrong, right? And then that is the one that we follow. So these stories, right, especially these last several stories of Judges, although I'm going to say the entire book, really shows that we don't know what's right, we don't know what's good, and we consistently follow what's good in our own minds because we don't recognize the leader and we don't follow the proper leader. And I feel that that's a good takeaway for me every day, especially doing these readings, that my leader is Jesus, and Jesus points to God, and God is the leader that created the world. And so those are the things that I need to hold dear and carry with me all the time in order to follow those things. So this is how we finish Judges today. It is not a happy ending. We don't see that they have reconciled anything. We don't see that they have done really great things. We don't see a joyful finish to this book. So we're going to start tomorrow in a different book. We are going to do the book of Ruth tomorrow, and that's one day we're going to quickly do the book of Ruth and just see what happened during the time of Judges, which is when Ruth takes place. If this has been a blessing to you at all, if you're not feeling super convicted, like you don't want to listen anymore, that's great. I want you to like it. I want you to share the channel with other people so they can read as well. I want you to subscribe to it. And as always, I say, I want you to keep reading. Try and do your reading first before you listen to me so you can hear my perspective on the scripture that is obviously the same scripture, but just to hear where my views come from. And as always, I would love for you to comment where your views are and what you saw, what the Lord sort of brought up to you in your reading. Guys, I want you to keep reading, and I will see you next time.